December 24th, 1914, the Christmas ceasefire. During the height of World War I, the Germans and the British were fighting. On this fateful day, bullets stopped, cannons ceased to fire, and there was an eerie hush over the battlefield. During that day, the soldiers decided to celebrate, not victories, not defeat of their enemies, but Christmas, the birth of Christ. Earlier that month, on December 7th of 1914, Pope Benedict XV had called for a ceasefire to be celebrated on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day so that the soldiers could celebrate the birth of Christ. The nations involved in the world conflict refused this request, but the soldiers got wind of this idea and decided that day that they would take it upon themselves to have a moment of peace. My friends, as we get into the Advent season, we reflect upon the important elements of Advent: peace, hope, love, joy. These are the themes that we'll be doing in order during this season. And so on Sunday mornings, we will reflect upon this, and then the two devotions during the week will also go a little bit further. And so today I want to talk more specifically about peace. On December 24th of 1914, the soldiers of those two warring nations, Germany and Great Britain, decided to have a moment of peace, a moment of celebration. On Christmas Day of that year, the bombs had ceased to fly for almost 24 hours. German soldiers were found in the no man's land between the trenches, and the British soldiers had feared that those particular soldiers were ones who were going to trick them. But once they saw that these soldiers were unarmed, they came out of their own trenches and then went and shook hands, exchanged gifts, and began to sing carols together. Some of them knew the language of the other, others did not, but the tunes were familiar, and the message was clear: peace on earth, goodwill towards men. In Micah chapter 4 it says, "They will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." The words of the prophet are vital and important to us. They help us hear the message of Christ, the message of peace that passes understanding. This past Sunday, we reflected on Joseph's story in the New Testament, Mary's husband, the one who would become the earthly father of Jesus. And we reflected that Joseph operated within his sense of peace that he created through his own plans. Joseph was a carpenter. He lived by the mantra of measure twice, cut once. This was not just true in his business, but in every aspect of his life. Make sure that things were planned, prescribed, worked out well in his mind. He had a thought of what his life would look like with Mary, his wife, but then news came that she was pregnant, not with his child, but with someone else's. He was devastated. He was angry. He was confused. This is not the way he'd planned his life to be. But then God showed up. And God offered a peace that passed his own understanding, that the one who was in Mary's womb would become the Prince of Peace. A peace that was not of Joseph's creating or any of our own creating, but one that was a gift of God. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, let your request be known to God. And the peace of Christ, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." These words sound so poetic, so comfortable, but in the midst of really challenging and difficult times, they're hard to put in practice. Be anxious about nothing, but too often, like Joseph, our plans are what bring us peace. We know that we've worked and we've thought and we've prayed and we've put our plans together. And we know those plans will lead us to greater fruitfulness and greater understanding. But too often, God's plans, the world's interruptions, get in the way. And our peace is messed up. Our peace is disturbed because our plans are failed and flawed. My friends, this week as we think about peace, I want to encourage and challenge all of us to think about the peace of God. I live here in a solitary moment, a place of darkness, ignited by one simple candle, a candle of an Advent wreath. And as the season continues, more of these candles will be lit, and more of the light of Christ will be known as we think about peace, hope, love, joy, Christ. As we think about these things, we know that peace begins a foundation of where we want to go and how we want to live. But too often, peace of mind and peace of heart, peace in our relationships and peace in our world is hard to come by. Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." We are called to be peacemakers, called to live out peace in our world. But too often we find it difficult because we ourselves are not at peace. Today we want to reflect, think about, pray, and remember the peace of Christ. I invite you to go into your own solitary places and reflect and think about what peace might mean for you. Bruce Larson, who is a pastor, author, teacher, and counselor, tells a story of how he worked in New York City for years. And he worked with people who had anxiety issues and struggles. They struggled to surrender their lives to Christ. And so just a few blocks from his office was the RCA building. Outside the RCA building, there is an iconic statue of Atlas, a famous Greek god who held the world upon his shoulders. Man of structured and chiseled features, struggled under weight of this great world. Dr. Larson would bring his clients there and tell them that sometimes it looks as if they are living life like Atlas, trying to have the weight of the entire world upon their shoulders. Just across the street from that building is a contrasting statue. At St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, there is a small and simple statue of Jesus. In this statue, he looks like a boy, but in his hand is a globe, holding the whole world in his hands, not in stress and strain and trouble, but simply holding the whole world in his hands. My friends, today, Jesus Christ has you and me in his hands. The way to ultimate peace is not through strain and struggle, not through our own effort and our own plans, but by the very grace of God. It is my prayer that the light of this candle will offer you peace today, and that you will know the grace of God that is with you now and always.